So the next speaker we have is Professor Alan Young. For those of you, Alan Young, everybody in this room knows who Professor Alan Young is. He's a legendary source, legal. He's a legendary lawyer. What he did in Bedford, in my view, I've been a lawyer for 20 plus years, and that's the most amazing thing I've ever seen a lawyer do, was what Alan did in Bedford. He has been in the cutting edge of medical marijuana in Canada since before Parker. Professor Alan Young was trying to change the law. He did HITSIG, coming out, reshaping the MMAR, kicking Health Canada and the government's butt. You should see the look on Crown's faces when they hear that Alan Young is going to be the lawyer on the file. They have like a bell in the Crown's office that they ring, like an alarm system, when Alan's on a case. So they like flash, it's like Batman, they flash something in the sky and they say, we have to do something. So anyway, yeah, HITSIG, Factopolis, I absolutely kicked their butt again. Anyway, he is he's reshaped the law in Canada. He was my professor 27 years ago. I think you were. So. So anyway, Alan Young, and he's also the vice president of NORML Canada. He's on the board of directors. So the big decisions we make, sometimes we require urgent assistance for the board to guide us, because we take our responsibilities really seriously. People give their time and their money, and they say, you know what NORML's doing, we got to get behind it. So rest assured that we take our job very seriously, and we welcome all other serious activists to come and join us. But anyway, so please welcome Alan Young.
Thank you, thank you. That's like the music of a game show. I got to give something away. Thank you very much. That was very kind. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for Dom for letting us use this space, and Chris for arranging it, and everybody. That's great. I'm not really sure what to talk about. I've been talking about this for so long, and I'm going to tell you something that's going to make me feel really old, but I want to tell you. It was 42 years ago today. 42 years ago today, on last week in September, I became a cannabis activist because of my mother. Because what happened was this. I was reading a lot about marijuana. It sounded like something I wanted to try. People told me I couldn't really listen to Sgt. Pepper's unless I was high. I should do that. And I had no source of marijuana. I was in a private school. I was very sheltered. I had no idea. But I read a lot. So there was a book by Abby Hoffman called Steal This Book. And okay. So at the back of the book, he talked about legal highs. So he's reflecting on that Mellow Yellow song by Donovan, right? And said, look, people can get high by scraping the whites of banana peels and drying it up and smoking it. I'm thinking, okay, I got bananas, I can do this. So my parents went out for the afternoon. We had a kitchen in the basement. I went downstairs, scraped it, dried it out, tried to roll it. Every time I went to smoke it, it was too wet, right? So I keep trying, and then the doorbell rings, and it's my uncle. So I run upstairs, and I have to entertain my uncle, and I left the joint downstairs. My mother comes home, she finds the joint. So she brings it up and says, okay, Alan, I know you're smoking marijuana. We should talk about this. I couldn't tell her I was smoking a banana because I was afraid her response would be, okay, that's a psychiatric issue. So, we'll have to do something. So I said, you caught me. And you know what? She did the right thing. For every day, for 6 months, she would cut out newspaper articles and say, here's what's wrong about marijuana. And it was so overwhelming what she was showing me, I knew it couldn't be true. I was only 14 years old, but I knew there was something wrong with this, and that's what converted me to an activist, because I was determined from an academic perspective, I hadn't smoked marijuana yet, to find out if there was any truth to any of this bullshit she was showing me. So thanks, Mom. I know she regrets what happened. It didn't really play out the way she wanted to, but it's been 40 years that I've been fighting for this, and I stand here today and I think, I don't know what to say to you people. It seems like a very auspicious time, right? We're on the cusp of an enormous change. But all I can remember is the Who song, Won't Get Fooled Again, is in my head. And it's haunting me. And it's funny, I met with John this morning, and John's my vintage too, and he goes way back, and he knows this stuff. And he had all this memorabilia. And he shows me an article from 1979, and I remember this so well, just coming out of high school, thinking the world is going to change. 3 parties backed decriminalization of marijuana. 3 parties, and nothing changed, did it? Thanks, John, for reminding me of how tragic our history is. Look, what history tells us, and I just want to talk a bit about history and then about current times. History tells us 2 things. History tells us don't get so excited. The promise of change is undercut by things like that. There's been many promises. We've been here before. But history also shows us that change is inevitable. This law has never sat on a valid foundation. Never. Okay? For a quick history lesson, 1923 we create the law. It was created because of fear of visible minorities. It had nothing to do with science or any understanding of marijuana. And all the prosecutions until the 1960s were all visible minorities, and nobody gave a shit, right? Because it just were the outsiders. It took the 60s and all these white middle-class kids to start smoking, then everybody started calling for reform. You had the Dane Commission, the Schaefer Commission, because our kids were using marijuana and we didn't want to demonize them. And things should have changed in the 70s as everyone was recommending reform. And then unfortunate things happened because, you know, a lot of life is about fortuity. Things just happen. 3 things. Reagan. Okay? So Reagan had to give Nancy Reagan some portfolio because First Lady has to have one. She has no capabilities, so he gave her the war on drugs, and she's the one who came up with just say no. That was the mantra for the 1980s, the most bizarre mantra in the world. It's like going into a psychiatric facility with the people who are depressed. Just cheer up. Like that's a solution to anything, just say no. Then Canada got Mulroney. And his mantra, though he never said it, was just say American. He just would do whatever Reagan wanted to do. And that decade of the 80s was filled with so much hysteria. I remember really watching the newspapers closely in the late 70s as how they tried to drum up opposition to what looked like reform of marijuana laws. And then in the 80s, they looked for any story to scare people. And I remember in Toronto the story of Benji Hayward. Had nothing to do with pot, it was LSD. Goes to a Pink Floyd concert, LSD, Pink Floyd seems like a good combination, but he did end up drowning in Lake Ontario. It happens. Tragic things happen. Hey, tragic things have happened with pot. We don't want to recognize that, but it's quite infrequent. So what governments do is they take one story, they extrapolate to the general population, they scare the hell out of you that everyone who takes drugs is going to become Benji Hayward. So we entered into the dark ages in the 1980s, where it didn't seem like anything good would come of it. How did we get out of the dark ages? It's a cultural change, because even though it was the dark ages, people didn't stop smoking. Consumption went down slightly, but it was always still there in the shadows. So culturally, it started to change. As you notice, people would start to joke more about cannabis. Cheech and Chong became a little bit more popular. So people like John and I started to use the law for social change. Why? Because it's all I know how to do. That's what I'm trained to do. 2, I have absolutely no trust and belief in politicians. 3 parties promise decriminalization. Give me a break. They'll tell you whatever you want to hear until such time as they have to make a decision, and they'll find 4,000 reasons not to do it. So I turn to the courts, not because I have that much respect for old men and women who are judges, but there's a certain neutrality and objectivity. It's not caught up in the hysteria quite as much. So the 1990s really is what changed everything and kick-started in Canada. And now we're at this stage now. For me, the most important thing was the beginning of the 90s in invalidating the drug literature laws, which allowed cannabis culture, high times to circulate. It created a dialogue. All the stuff you know about cannabis occurred because we removed the repressive sanction that said, hey, don't talk about anything that glamorizes drugs. Then John and I got involved, separate cases, and Malma Levine was there too, using the charter to challenge the marijuana prohibition. I never in a million years thought that would be successful, but I knew if we could get media attention and get the right evidence before the court, people would start to learn about marijuana. And the greatest satisfaction in my career was August 1997 when they dismissed the constitutional challenge in Clay, and the headline in the Globe and Mail said, marijuana is relatively harmless, because that's what the judge found. And that to me was the beginning of the end of this sanction. Hey, but that's 1997. We're 20 years later, and it still hasn't changed. So more work had to be done. It's probably the next phase, and maybe the most significant phase in law reform, was all the medical stuff. Because everybody understands compassion and the need to use medical treatments that work for you. It was the easiest cases I've ever done in law. Hey, judges are all old men and women. I'm talking about cannabis and arthritis. They're going, oh, geez. You know, what if I want to use arthritis? I'm going to let the government tell me no? So we managed to normalize marijuana beyond recreational use into medical use. And here's the thing about medical use. If it's good for medicine, it means it's relatively safe, right? And if it's relatively safe, then what's the recreational prohibition all about? So we've really managed to sort of unravel a lot of the mythology through the medical stuff. But quite frankly, that's as far as the law is going to take us. The charter's not going to take us any further. It's now a pure political parliamentary decision, and we are in an election year where it is being debated, at least in a modest way. But listen, you can't be complacent and think it's inevitable. It's going to happen. Trudeau's going to get in. We're going to legalize. We're really far away from that, and a lot of work has to be done, and we only have about a month or so. But things are encouraging. I want to just share with you that I met with Trudeau. I'm not doing that much politically because I hate politics, but when he said he's going to legalize, I thought, oh, gee, I got to speak to this guy and see if I can help. Now that I'm older and people take me seriously, they didn't when I was 30 and 25, I was just a pothead, I thought I could help him. So I met with his advisors, and he showed up by surprise. And my impression, and I've been duped many times in my life, but my impression was he's sincere. And you know what? He's not into pot. His advisors were telling me he tried it when they were all at, I forget what university, Laval, McGill, Concordia? Doesn't matter. And he's the only one who didn't like it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, why does he come out and tell Canadians that? Because that's what they have to hear because he looks so young. I'm not a pot smoker, but I understand that the best thing for Canada is to move in the direction of Europe and the American states that have legalized. He would get a lot more credibility because right now what's undercutting him is his youth, and the Conservatives are using that. Oh, he's young. He must be going to parties and getting high with vaporizers, you know, all that type of stuff. So the bottom line is the only reason why things are good right now is because the police don't care. And that's a big start. It is such a low priority for them. It is astonishing what is going on around this country right now. Beyond Trudeau's statement, the great gulag in the South is changing. That's a remarkable change. But what really freaks me up, because I've been out of the scene a little bit, is walking around the streets and seeing how many dispensaries there are, how many clubs there are, how many smoke-ins, vapor lounges. I don't even know what you call it anymore. People are walking down the street smoking. Everyone's acting like the law is dead. That will mean the law will die. However, understand, while you get excited and dance on the streets getting high, people like John, Paul, myself are still dealing with the shit, okay? For example, I got to deal with a mandatory minimum sentence of 6 months for someone who grew 29 plants in Barrie. It's astonishing, first offender, and it's a serious case that I have to challenge. I can't believe the government would think this is appropriate to send one to jail. I got a call yesterday from a teacher in Aurelia, got my number, called me, says, I got caught with 3 grams driving in my car, and they want to prosecute me, and I'm going to lose my job as a teacher. And now I got to speak to the Crown in Aurelia and speak to them about, you know, withdrawing the charge so he doesn't lose his job, destroy a life over 3 grams. So I know we feel things have changed, but they haven't really changed. The bottom line is we're surviving on the low priority of the police, and that could change overnight. All that government has to do to change that is give the police money to enforce the drug law. They will. They just don't right now because they're not giving any increased budgetary allocation, and they got bigger problems, gun crimes, heavier drugs, things like that. But here's what sort of puzzles me about this thing. You know there's 3 million users, roughly. I know that a lot of the 3 million are not of voting age, okay? But at least half are. How can we not elect someone who's promoting legalization with that many people? But the weird thing about this election is it's floated as an issue, but nobody's talking about it. Everybody wants to talk about the economy and national security, and I understand that. That's important. Marijuana is an economical issue. You may not think of it that way. I think of it as a principled issue. You have a right, autonomous right to consume what you want. But if you want to do economy and business and capitalism, marijuana is right there. I mean, we're talking about approximately $750 million would be saved on law enforcement. And Fraser Institutes and the Harvard economic professors, they all think it's around $11 billion in tax revenue. You know, if Trudeau wants to run a deficit for 3 years, he's got to legalize because that's how he's going to, in 2019, balance the budget. And I think that's why he's somewhat sincere about this. But even though it's an economic issue, and it's sound economic policy to legalize marijuana and probably all drugs, quite frankly, nobody wants to talk about it, and this is why. It's difficult. Despite the importance of the issue to Canada and to our environment and to our economy, there are two reasons why people don't want to go out on a limb and on a platform to say, I want to legalize marijuana, let's debate and talk about it. Even if marijuana can be proven to be benign and harmless, which I think we've proven that, people see it as trivial. It's about getting high. How could that be a #1 political issue? It's like making the right to play golf a political issue. But if you took away the right to play golf from all the old people in this world, it will become a political issue, right? If you start calling golf addicts golf heads, like potheads, we will start to make it an important issue. So people are worried, and I think Trudeau is worried, that if he starts to talk about it, he's going to get questions about, are you going to promote this because it's good for your hair or something like that? That they're going to trivialize him and make him seem like a little baby because he does have that baby face. The second reason why it's hard to do this politically, nobody wants to talk about the value of getting high. It's like everyone say, marijuana's safe. Okay, that's fine. But nobody wants to go to the next part and say, it's actually a good thing for a lot of people. Not for everybody. Let's not be foolish. But for most people, there's enormous value. Whether it's spiritual value, whether it's intellectual value, or whether it's just the frivolity of seeing the world through a new pair of eyes. I don't want to overstate it, but there is value. But you know, if I start talking like that in some conservative environment with a lot of older people, I lose them. Because they're only willing to go as far as say, hey, it's safe, maybe we should back away. They don't want to say anything that's encouraging about marijuana to encourage use. So, quite frankly, it's a very difficult political issue, which is completely skewed by the fact that there's so much misinformation. From 1923 to 2015, we're no brighter than we were 80, 90 years ago when we started this thing. Prohibitionists, and I'm sorry to say it, reformers also lie. We distort things to our end. Prohibition are way worse, by the way. We're not even in the same ballpark as they are. But everyone, motivation affects perception. You believe what you want to believe, and there's so much nonsense. I'm going to give you two examples, one historical, one contemporary. The historical one was important to me when I started doing medical marijuana use. All my clients at the beginning were HIV/AIDS patients. I was given studies by the government that said marijuana impairs the immune system. I go, oh my God. I can't advance a claim for HIV patients that they should smoke marijuana. It's just going to make them more sick. So I went to do the research and found out these studies came out in the 1970s from a guy named Nahas in Colombia. And they've been thoroughly discredited. And why did Nahas create this hysteria about immune impairment? Because he had this view. He was Egyptian, and he believed that the great civilization of Egypt, thousands of years ago, it fell apart because everyone was smoking hash. There's no historical record for that. He must have been smoking hash to come up with that idea. But the reality was, he had this aversion to marijuana because he felt it hurt his culture and his ethnicity. Nothing to do with science, but for 30 years, people believed this. And it was very frightening when we started the whole medical marijuana campaign to wonder whether or not he was right. The second example I want to give you is Harper. This I can't understand, and my wife is really on me. Why don't you get more involved, more political? Why aren't you speaking more? And say, I'm leaving it for other people at this stage of my career. But Harper came out in August and finally said, I'm going to say a few words about pot, you know, to diffuse Trudeau in case he's getting popular. We do not support legalization of marijuana for 3 reasons, he says. You ready? 1, consumption in Canada has been lowered because of our penal policy. Unbelievable. Wait. Canada, per capita, we smoke more pot than anyone in the world. I guess you can take some pride in that, but the reality is, how could he say that when Canada has 3 million users and 28% of the population has smoked marijuana, higher than any Western liberal democracy? Then he says, well, if I do legalize, consumption will increase even more. Bizarre. In Holland, it's a 17% consumption rate. You can walk out your house, go to the cafe, buy hash. They aren't. The forbidden fruit syndrome of making something illegal makes people want to do it, and that's why I was smoking the bananas too. I wanted to be a rebel. Doesn't sound like it, you know, smoking bananas makes you a rebel, but it did in my mind at 14 years old. Then he says, the third reason, Canadians don't support the change. Now, here's why I'm upset, and why I'm upset with the Liberals, the New Democrats. I'm upset with everybody, including myself. All three statements he made are empirically false. They're easy to demonstrate that they're false. When someone says, oh, marijuana might cause psychoses, that's a hard thing to debate. Okay, there's a lot of nuance to the statement. But all three things, our consumption rate, whether it goes up or down, and Canadian public opinion, which has always stood at 70% of Canadians want a change, and about 40% want legalization. No one responded to him. This guy gets away with murder. Forget pot. You have to say, if he's going to lie about things that are so obvious and easy to prove, what else is he lying about? What about the deficit? What about his national security plans? It wasn't exploited because nobody wants to really promote the whole drug issue. I know there's a debate coming up in a day or two, and I'm damn curious to see if anyone brings this up, and I bet you nobody does. So, the reason I mention all this, because it's a little bit disappointing to see, is the revolution will not be televised. That's what I'm going to tell you. The revolution will not be televised. There will not be a public debate on the value of marijuana legalization. There will not be an opportunity in the next month to educate people, to tell them and diffuse the mythology of cannabis use. We don't have the time. People don't want to debate it. It is an issue for this election, but it's sitting in the shadows. But you have a unique opportunity. Your friends have a unique opportunity. You got to get out and talk to people. You finally can speak through your vote on this issue. And so here's what I say, because I really have no faith in any of the parties. If there's nothing else about the Liberal platform that offends or repulses you, vote for them. Because it appears to be a sincere offer. They need to do this to get out of their 3 years of deficits. Give them the opportunity to prove that they will be honest and have some integrity. It's a big assumption, but I really think when you look at all three parties, I don't really think it makes a lot of sense to vote for one right now because one wants to run a deficit, one doesn't. These are trivial things that people will change their mind on once in power. But if he's being sincere, this is a unique opportunity for us because I warn you, if we don't do it now and Harper gets in, you got another 5 years of stupidity and repression because I believe Harper would want to legalize. I truly believe. But he said so many awful things about marijuana, he can't do it. He dug himself into a hole. He wants the same tax revenue that's coming out of Colorado, but he would look like a complete fool if he stood up and said, now I see the wisdom in cannabis. Why he's so against cannabis, I don't know. We knew Nahas had this whole thing about his ethnicity. Harper, I can't figure out. I look at him. I kind of picture him in high school. He's probably the kid at the party who was sitting in the corner, they passed a joint to, he started to smoke it, and he started coughing and spitting, and his eyes were tearing, and everybody made fun of him, and that's probably why he is the way he is. And that's how... It has nothing to do with his party sitting down and looking at the available evidence. Now, the one thing I will say about the NDP, because I heard it here today, and I didn't know their promise of a commission. As much as I don't like it and it delays things, I can guarantee you the result of any commission will be the same as the Ledane Commission. And it will trigger some good response. But can we wait 5 years? Probably. But I still don't want to be running to Barrie to defend someone on a mandatory minimum. I don't want to be dealing with Crown attorneys on 3 grams. We have bigger problems in this country than going after people who like to get high a little bit or like to get high a lot. It really doesn't matter because we're not seeing any evidence of an increased harm to society as a result of people who smoke a lot. And never personalize a debate. It's really rude to do so. But you know what? I've been smoking for 42 years, and I'm still standing, and I'm still a productive, law-abiding citizen in every other regard. So if you really want to change the law beyond voting, start getting people you know who are venture capitalists, who are doctors, who are lawyers, who are politicians, who are police officers, who are judges. I know them. Tell them to come out and start talking. Because when Pierre Burton came out in the 2000s and said, I like to smoke pot, everybody listened and thought, oh my God, he wrote these iconic books about a railroad while high, you know? That's quite the achievement. And that's one of the reasons why we're a little bit behind the States right now, is because nobody in positions of power or influence, other than people like myself who've been out of the closet for so long it doesn't matter, nobody wants to come forward. But if Canadians knew who were the smokers in this country, they would quickly realize that it is not something that harms a country. It can only enhance the life of this country. Thank you.
We are at a historic time, and hopefully we can get all our friends and neighbors out there, and let's get rid of these guys. Not just in cannabis area that they've done a lot of damage to Canada. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms in 1982 was brought in by Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Jean Chrétien, and it has saved us from a horrible situation. If it wasn't for the Charter, if we hadn't become a constitutional democracy in 1982, we would be in serious trouble. Thank God for the independent courts who have stood up to this stuff and struck it down as being unconstitutional. Very few places in the world that you can do that. You can do it in Canada. Thank you.